Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with David French of National Review, who's in for the vacationing Jim Garrity. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today, but we warn you at the top, we are on three pretty heavy subjects today, and the second one in particular, you might want to be careful if there are little ears near you, and we'll give you a little warning when we get to that one. But David, this first good martini, we're kind of twisting around from just a really twisted and deplorable approach to Jack Phillips. Jack Phillips is the owner and operator of Masterpiece Cake Shop. Most folks will remember that he won at the Supreme Court in a 7-2 decision. His right through the First Amendment to not make a cake, especially for celebrating same-sex marriage. But the very same day, more people are trying to make trouble for him. This is courtesy of the Daily Wire, but right now the Daily Wire is quoting the Daily Caller. On the same day, the High Court agreed to review the Masterpiece case. An attorney named Autumn Scardina called Phillips' shop and asked him to create a cake celebrating a sex transition. The caller asked that the cake include a blue exterior and a pink interior, a reflection of Scardina's transgender identity. Phillips declined to create the cake given his religious conviction that sex is immutable, while offering to sell the caller other pre-made baked goods. In the months that followed, the bakery received requests for cakes featuring marijuana use, sexually explicit messages, and satanic symbols. I have to clean up this next sentence. One solicitation submitted by email asked the cake shop to create a 3-tiered white cake depicting Satan licking a, let's just say, sex toy. Phillips believes Scardina made all these requests. 3 weeks after Phillips won at the High Court, the commission issued a probable cause determination, finding there was sufficient evidence to support Scardina's claim of discrimination. Back to the Daily Wire now. Phillips has now sued, claiming violation of free exercise, free speech, due process, and equal protection. The lawsuit by the Alliance Defending Freedom asks for an injunction against the Civil Rights Commission and sues the head of the commission in her personal capacity. So, David, if folks are scratching their heads and wondering how is this possibly the good martini, the good martini is that Jack Phillips is on real good legal ground here, especially given his existing win, and this should put the SJWs in Colorado heavily on the defensive.
This is a situation where the facts are so bad they're good. So, in other words, Colorado has blundered badly here. Let's be really clear about what's happened. What's happened is that there has been an individual, again, this is going based on, and I'm looking at the actual verified complaint from Alliance Defending Freedom. It appears that there was an individual who began a campaign of harassment against Jack Phillips. And this campaign of harassment was designed to get him to decline a cake and then to create a cake and then complain to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission about his failure to design the cake. And the cake designs were nuts, were absolutely nuts. So there are a number of satanic cake designs that he requested, and that was just one of them that you read, a number of them. And then the claim was, and the presumption was he was going to try to claim discrimination on the basis of religion for Phillips not designing a satanic cake. And some of them were wild and lurid, just as you said. And then he apparently asked Phillips to create a cake to celebrate a transgender transition with blue on the outside and pink on the inside to symbolize that the person was actually a woman but was, assigned a male gender at birth or something along those lines. And in this case, incredibly, even after the Supreme Court of the United States, and not a 5-4 decision, in a 7-2 decision, had told the Colorado Civil Rights Commission it could not apply a double standard to Phillips, what did it do? It went and applied another double standard to Phillips, this time with a probable cause determination that he had violated the public accommodation statute in Colorado. Now, why is this good? Because it sounds pretty awful. It sounds pretty dreadful. Why is this good? Well, as you might remember, the Supreme Court did not address the underlying free speech claim that Phillips had in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. And in fact, the free speech claim that Phillips made was the most significant claim and the most contested. And one of the reasons why it was most contested is in his original case, he declined to create a cake for the gay couple before they asked for a specific design. And so he was saying, I will not create any cake for a specific couple. And a number of people then responded by saying, well, how do we know that that cake would have been expressive within the meaning of the First Amendment? I mean, obviously, if it had sort of, two men on top of the cake, or if it had words that celebrated same-sex marriage, that would be a different case than one where the cake was just a beautiful cake with no particular message on it. And there were a lot of smart people who said, well, if it had a particular message, I would believe he had a stronger First Amendment case than one where we don't know if it was going to have a particular message. In this instance, the request is overtly expressive. The design is specifically created in this context to celebrate a transgender transition. And so now he comes forward with a much stronger case, not just on religious liberty grounds, because it makes the double standard that much more blatant, but also on the First Amendment grounds that the Supreme Court did not specifically address. So Colorado has blundered into, through its malice and its foolishness, a gift-wrapped case, just a gift-wrapped case for Jack and for ADF to hammer them. Now, the only downside is the case is so gift-wrapped that it may not make it to the Supreme Court because the lower courts might just crush Colorado before it gets there. But this case is absolutely an ideal vehicle, and it's the hatred and malice and foolishness of this lawyer who's directing the campaign against Jack Phillips and the members of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, who richly deserve to be sued in their individual capacity because at this point they are willingly defying Supreme Court authority. So this is a martini that's so bad it's good.
Wow. And just to see, and Colorado's certainly not even probably the worst state on this. California's probably out there at the forefront, but obviously Colorado is terrible. The job is to protect constitutional rights, whether the state or the federal Constitution, and all they're doing, like we talked about yesterday with the SJWs and the legal community, they're doing it from their political perch as well, and it's just horrific, and it needs to stop, and hopefully a decision on the merits would go a long way in doing that.
Yes, hopefully, and I would love to see individual liability assessed against the relevant members of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. We'll see, but that's a whole other thing that we could talk about on a whole other podcast, is the difficulty in imposing individual liability on public officials. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we could hit them in the pocketbook, that would end the activism, hopefully, as well.
Absolutely.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
David, let's go to our bad martini now, and this is about as bad as one can get. For anyone who didn't hit pause and you have little ears around you on the podcast, do it now, please, and come back when the little ears aren't around. Yesterday, we got the report from the grand jury in the state of Pennsylvania about sexually abusive priests over the decades in the Keystone State. In this report, 301 different priests are identified, and this goes back to the 50s and so forth, all the way up to fairly recently. They identify 1,000 kids, and they say it's probably thousands, who were molested by these priests, and the the allegations and the evidence of the specific molestations is just enough to make your stomach turn. It's everything you would unfortunately imagine in this situation. Some of them going so far as having teenagers undress and pose like Christ on the cross, or forcing kids to perform certain acts and then washing their mouths out with holy water. And I mean, it's just absolutely repulsive. And equally repulsive, David, is the ongoing constant cover-up from the higher-ups. There was no effort to hold these people criminally accountable or even remove them from the clergy. All they would do is shuttle them around, and then the same thing would happen, and they would shuttle them around again. One of the people implicated here is the former bishop of Pittsburgh, who's now the archbishop here in Washington, Donald Wuerl, and because they looked at 6 different dioceses, Pittsburgh one of them, which had 99 priests mentioned, and Wuerl was just as bad as all these other overseers in this situation. And he is defending it, saying this report shows that we were diligent and we reached out to all these families. What he doesn't say is they reached out to tell them not to press charges or to make noise about it. And he doesn't point out that they never actually held these priests accountable. All they were interested in doing is protecting the church from scandal or from financial harm or anything like that. I mean, David, the impact is just shattering on these lives of these people who you see these people who are now in their 60s or even older, perhaps, who are molested, and you see the impact on their faces yesterday. And all this is going to do is damage the trust that people have in the church, which is, of course, a fundamental underpinning of Western civilization. I can't imagine what could be a worse martini than this.
Oh, this is pure evil, is what it is. It's absolutely pure evil. And to just kind of figure out the scale of the wrongdoing here, if you saw a movie, if there was a movie being put out in Hollywood that had the acts, that contained the acts that are described in this grand jury report, Catholic Americans would be rightfully protesting, saying it was, or it would be, well, until this grand jury report, rightfully protesting, saying this is just pure anti-Catholic hysteria and bigotry and exploitation of past scandals. But in this case, the truth is worse than anything Hollywood could concoct. And you barely scratch the surface. I mean, the allegations are so profoundly bad that I can't even really, in good conscience, recommend people read the grand jury report if they are at all, there are folks who have sort of very thick skins and can read of horrific acts and it not, deeply and profoundly affect them. But a lot of people could not read through this without being deeply, profoundly revolted, affected, to the point of sleeplessness. I mean, it's horrible. It is horrible. And, the thing is, the question that I have is something uniquely bad about Pennsylvania? Or is this the kind of activity that took place in other places around this country and maybe other countries? There's no indication from the grand jury report that there was something in the water or in the air or about Pennsylvania that was making it particularly bad. And that's what makes me sort of shudder to think of the broader implications. It's horrifying. I have friends. I'm not Catholic. I'm Protestant. I'm PCA Presbyterian. And look, I know that there are scandals in the Protestant church. I know it. Just in the last few months, we saw some terrible scandals in the Southern Baptist Convention, not on this scale, but we saw some scandals in the Southern Baptist Convention. There have been some revelations about problems and misconduct at Willow Creek outside of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I mean, so Lord knows there are problems that exist outside of the Catholic stream of Christianity. But holy cow, this is on a scale and a level that is just stunning. And you don't even know really where to begin in talking about it other than to say it's absolute evil. There has to be a complete house cleaning of anybody touched or tainted by this at all. There has to be, to the extent that it's still possible, vigorous response from law enforcement, people being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And, I'm sorry, if this starts to leak out beyond Pennsylvania, we have to look all the way up to the Vatican and say, who is going to take responsibility? And there has to be a level of repentance, genuine repentance from the Catholic hierarchy, even to the point of mass resignations if necessary. And again, I know I'm a Protestant speaking a little bit out of school, but read this report if you can and tell me I'm out of line. Tell me I'm out of line. People should go to jail for the rest of their lives. There should be a complete house cleaning. There has to be a revolution within the ranks of the leadership of the church to ensure that this does not happen again.
David, one of the things that we learned from the Attorney General in Pennsylvania is that while there are a couple of people who are going to be prosecuted, most of these crimes are now beyond the statute of limitations, which is exactly what the higher-ups wanted. They wanted to keep it quiet until it could no longer be prosecuted, which is so repulsive, it's almost hard to put into words. But on a crime like this, is it worth pushing for an end, do you think, to the statute of limitations?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that when you're talking about the absolute abuse of power that occurs here, and let's be very clear that this was an abuse of spiritual power, right? That in many ways is a greater level of power over an individual than the kind of power you see, say, in an employer-employee relationship, or even in a commander-subordinate relationship in the military. I mean, this is where this is where you're seeking eternal truth. This is where you're talking about your eternal destiny, not whether, this is beyond earthly matters. And so there's an abuse of power here that is so incredibly profound and troubling. And I do think it's worth considering. It's absolutely worth considering. One of the things that we have to be careful about is there have been waves of hysteria in this country before, particularly, and there's, it's really shameful when you look back on it, the waves of hysteria surrounding daycare abuse. I don't know if you remember that from the late 80s or early 90s, this sort of claim that there was a lot of ritual satanic abuse in American daycares, which sounds crazy to say out loud, but people actually got in the grips of that, and it was traced back to some very strange and bizarre prosecutions around the country that many of them were ultimately reversed. But there's no indication right now that we're in the grips of anything like that kind of hysteria, considering that there's an awful lot of support in this record that multiple priests were known to be involved, that the hierarchy moved them around, the allegations would crop up again, as you were saying. So we don't want to compare the two situations, but I will say the one caution I have about pulling the trigger on major changes in the law is we have seen abuses in the past, and we don't want to empower future abuses of the system. But at the same time, we need to carefully consider this.
Absolutely. And as I said before, the church and Christianity has been a fundamental underpinning of Western civilization. Christianity is the root. Most people, or maybe a lot of people, don't understand that in Western civilization, but is a major root for the liberty that exists in so many different ways. And the increasing secularization that's already going on might only ramp up as a result of disillusionment because of this, and that's going to be bad for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, how does the Catholic hierarchy approach the American people right now and say with a straight face that we can be trusted? And every church hierarchy that I've ever known, if it's honest, says we're comprised of fallen human beings in the same way that everyone else is fallen, and none of us is perfect. But we diligently do our best to uphold the ideals of our faith, is the way that a functioning church hierarchy approaches the public. The Catholic hierarchy has real difficulty approaching the public on anything like that basis, because it seemed like what they were diligently doing, at least in Pennsylvania, they were not diligently trying to uphold the highest ideals of the Catholic faith. They were diligently covering up heinous crimes in the goal of protecting the church from legal and public accountability. And that is a perversion of everything that is good and right and holy, and it's just evil.
Evil is the only word you can come up with. Sometimes you're just at a loss of words, even though that's our job. David, like you, I'm not Catholic. I'm Protestant evangelical as well, and we might get some comments on this, but you got to think anyone who looks at this with a sober mind is going to come to the same conclusion. All right, let's move on to our crazy martini now, and let's talk about Chelsea Clinton and the issue of abortion. Chelsea Clinton recently was at an event entitled Rise Up for Roe, so obviously a pro-choice event. And Chelsea Clinton says that virtually any issue you care about goes back to Roe v. Wade. So if you care about something, protecting Roe v. Wade is critical as well. In fact, she says ever since Roe v. Wade was adopted by the Supreme Court in 1973, it's been great for the economy.
It is not a disconnected fact to Justice T-shirt of 1973 that American women entering the labor force from 1970 to 2009 added $3.5 trillion to our economy, right? Like the net new entrance of women. That is not disconnected from the fact that Roe became the law of the land in January of 1973.
David, I'm sure you've got plenty to say about this, but somehow putting a price tag on 60 million lives is also completely repulsive. And oh, by the way, those 60 million people would have contributed a lot to the economy as well.
Right. I mean, what would be the net effect of 60 million new workers, 60 million new people, of which on that number would be hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, inventors, scientists, people who would be creating wealth, creating innovative new products, dreaming up new ideas that would transform the American landscape. I mean, that's just unbelievably absurd on its own terms when you look at the millions of lives lost. And then, let's ask Chelsea, has she heard of a working mom before?
Right.
I mean, she has a working mom, or she had a working mom until she's now, I guess, largely unemployed from her primary occupation of politics. But what on earth? We have 3 kids, and my wife is a very productive member of the economy. This is all just ridiculous. But what it does do is it shows the centrality of Roe, not just to the sexual revolution side of the left, but in many ways to the worldview of the left more generally, that Roe is something that's an underpinning of an entire ideology. It's an underpinning of a legal philosophy. It's an underpinning of the sexual revolution. It's the underpinning of a political party increasingly. And that is sad. I mean, that is sad that a judicial opinion creating a constitutional right to kill a child in the womb has now achieved such a central place in the ideology and identity of one of our 2 great political parties. I mean, that is absolutely tragic. And it has given rise to just fuzzy, crazy thinking like that. No, Roe is not responsible for the growth in American economy due to women entering the workforce. There are working moms all over the United States of America, but there are millions of lives lost that would have contributed immense amount of wealth to the American nation. So that it's sad and it's silly at the same time.
David, heavy topics all the way across the board today. As usual, you articulated them very well. Thanks for your time as always, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thanks for having me.
David French of National Review, and for Jim Garrity today, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and please tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.